some Grammy nominees, possibly, some of the people that are here. But no, and I want to thank Tina and thank Rick and thank everybody in this room because that's what it's going to take to make sure that these properties are restored, that they stay around for a long time. And I look forward to seeing the sequel. And I think it's going to be a good film, not just well done, but in terms of something that we can be proud of. And we're fortunate that we have elected officials that really get the issue and care about it. Andy Stewart, our supervisor in the town of Orangetown, and we have our new supervisor, George Holman, in the town of Clarkstown. I can attest to both of these elected officials have been lobbying me to say, hey, we need money to fix these properties. So we have advocates that are fighting for us. But I think what's important, what I would like to stress from the film, you've documented and really shown a case study of what can happen, what are some of the good things, and what are some of the bad things. And what you heard was we need a plan. We need a vision. We need a vision for these properties so that we can push it along. And that's what we've seen. The success stories, we've seen that vision. So I'm just honored and privileged to be a part of this, and any way that I can be helpful in the future, I look forward to doing that. So thank you for doing this.
So the segue to the sequel is so much has happened since I finished this film, which wasn't that long ago, which is funny because when you think about historic preservation, you think of things going very glacially. But oddly, two announcements that I would like to make. The first is that the town of Clarkstown has since terminated its license agreement with the Rockwood Farm Alliance. Now, what this means is that we have the opportunity to create a new vision for the 9-acre property, hopefully one that showcases our historical assets. That's first of all. And secondly, I'm proud to tell you that the John Green Preservation Coalition has won a 2016 Rockland County Executive Historic Preservation Merit Award, wow, that's a mouthful, in the Preservation Leadership category. So, now I'm going to invite the panelists to come up and take their designated seats, and we will move on to the panel discussion. To Mary Cardenas, the director of the Orangetown Museum. I think that you'd agree that the loss of the Lent House energized us. It got people to roll up their sleeves and get out there and work to save other houses. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of momentum and sustained interest in valuable historic houses?
Well, Tina, I think that with the loss of the Lent House, people were angry. They were angry that part of the history of their community had been demolished, and there's no way of replacing it. Losing the Lent House, a significant house because of the history of the ownership, it just brought probably people, or made people more aware of what can happen if you don't speak out, if you don't join forces, if you don't go to your government officials and let them know what's happening in the community, because sometimes the officials don't really know how strong the sentiment is in saving a house. We were fortunate to save the Seth House because of the significance of the architecture. A piece of history with that was Montgomery Mays Sr. is reported to have lived there. Now, Montgomery Mays developed part of the golf course, and he was quite a character in the community. But the developer felt a sense of ownership of this house, and he saw it was a golden opportunity to take something like the Seth House and work it into the plan. when I approached the folks who were developing this parcel of land where the Lent House was, they told me that they were going to put in a strip mall. And I was asked by a number of people, what's going in the strip mall? Well, I was told again that it would be common stores like nail spas and pizza parlors and things like that. And the thing that bothered me about that is there was no real marketing or no real plan of even thinking about incorporating that Lent House into a plan, like they did with the Seth House. And I find that troubling. It's unfortunate, it happens. It's a piece of Orangetown history lost forever. And this type of architecture is really significant because it's something that was created here in colonial America.
You know, my second question to you is that not every old house can be saved. Is there some general criteria to follow in terms of what is worthwhile to save?
Well, again, there's a number of features, one of which is what's significant about this house. Is it the architecture? Is it the person that owned it? Was there a historic event that took place there? And you kind of take each house on an individual basis to grant it or place it in importance.
Okay, thank you. Next to Rick Tannenbaum, president of the John Green Preservation Coalition. Rick, why in the world did you think a bank would donate a house? And can you give us some insight as to what your internal process was to make that happen?
Sure. Well, we're not a municipality and we're not wealthy. And, we didn't have any power over the future of the house. And I knew that the only way to get power over the future of the house was to own it. And I didn't have any money to offer the bank. I didn't have any sort of, laws or codes to protect it. So I had to think, what does the bank want? Like, what can I offer them to take over this house? So I looked up the owner of the bank in the public records, and it was a group represented by Ocwen Financial. And Ocwen Financial, if you just do a Google search on them, they're like the worst mortgage servicer in the country. I mean, they're being sued in every single state. They're being sued by the federal government. They're actually under a district court order to clean up their act, and they were looking for like some positive PR. They were looking for some good press. They were looking for some goodwill. And it just occurred to me that I could offer them like all this media and all this like free publicity about all the wonderful things that they're about to do. So I mean, they have their own PR company, and they called us, and we all said, well, how can we get this message out about the generosity of Ocwen? So we were thrilled. I mean, we basically, we would do anything that they asked us to do that was accurate, and we basically gave them what they wanted. They were also under an incredible burden from the taxes on the property, from the maintenance. They had a number of citations from the village, and we were able to just take it all away from them and give them something in return. So we floated a proposal. We went through maybe 10 or 15 rounds of negotiation, and we walked out with a house free and clear. And after processing our tax paperwork, because we're a 501c3, we don't have a mortgage, we don't have taxes. We basically, everything that we do, all the money that we raise is just geared towards, restoring the house.
That said, I was going to say now the real work begins. So can you talk about the challenges of restoring a house that does not necessarily have a high profile pedigree?
Oh yeah. Actually, the first thing I learned is that nobody knows who John Green is. And nobody's heard of him. He's buried in the cemetery here in Nyack. He has this wonderful tombstone and all, but nobody's ever heard of him. And we're down at the end of Main Street where very few people go. We're down at 23 Main Street. So we had no name recognition, we have no foot traffic, and because we're a 501c3 instead of a municipality, we're not eligible for the kind of funding that the Vanderbilt Bucky House might be open for, or a village-owned house was. So we basically, our goal is to so integrate ourselves into the community of Nyack and the community of Orangetown and Rockland, is that people start to think of the house, because we have to we have to pledge to everybody that we're going to take this house and use it for a community purpose. So recognizing that the house was a 3-story house, a 3-family house, we're going to keep the ground floor of the house for a public purpose, a community center, a historic museum, you know, a public event space. We're going to keep the porch and the gardens for ourselves, and we're going to convert the upper 2 floors into rental income so that we could sustain the house and going forward. But we're dependent, you know, on the generosity of everybody to do that. And actually, you'll all find a membership form on your seats. And you know, any donations, any public support we could get is wonderful. That's how we're going to do it. You know, $1 at a time.
Thank you. Stephen Tilly. Stephen Tilly is a preservation architect. You've seen the current state of the John Green House. Can you tell us, from your perspective, what is needed to ideally restore the house with historic integrity while giving it a viable, sustainable, and perhaps revenue-generating future?
Okay. First, I want to thank you for your movie, and in honor of your movie and the John Green Coalition, I'm going to unfurl my own copy of the National Trust.
This place matters.
This place matters.
All right.
So, what it takes is a social organization project. It takes community organizing, which is an incredible. I mean, just filling this room. I know this is the choir, but there's a network that reaches well beyond it, and it's establishing that kind of network and branching out from that network that it takes. I mean, it takes a lot of money. It probably takes more money than has been already projected. It's intimidating, but it happens one step and one stone at a time, with the right kind of guidance from us preservation geeks, some of us sitting on this board, but I think more importantly, a will in the community. And I'm incredibly impressed by what you've done. I mean, it's a shame that it took the kind of losses and the tragedy that you've documented. It's important to document it the way you have, because it brings the message home. But it really is about establishing relationships. It's making connections, and then getting obviously good advice. And I think we all have to have. I mean, it's not about how important the person was, really, or how unbelievably exceptional the architecture is. There's a real rationale. There's an environmental rationale. There's a social rationale. The buildings, our language is ancient. We keep adding little pieces, but we don't start from scratch with our language. And the same thing is true of our built environment. So I think it's more about people and establishing those connections to make this happen.
Can you offer some kind of a visual vision of how you could see the building evolve? I mean, you've seen it. It's there's a lot of.
I mean, I think Rick alluded to. I mean, we need to have an inventory of uses in mind for buildings, for the reuse of buildings, because that's God's work. Obviously, things have happened in the building over time. There's some mysteries. I was talking to Bill Krattinger earlier about what's happening up on top, and Wynn Perry has elucidated a lot of them. But I think the original image of the building as a sandstone building with a gambrel roof provides the sort of direction that one wants to move in, and then what accommodations have to be made. This is not, this is the level of preservation concern about the interior is not, we don't have an intact interior, so that provides some freedom for the kinds of uses that can activate and then support the building in its location. Having that building in that location, near the bridge, near the waterfront, near the downtown, as a vital player in the economy is going to be really important. So I think thinking creatively about uses and about income streams. I'm associated with an historic site where we spent the last 10 years or more just thinking about income streams that don't conflict with preservation. So that kind of thinking is key.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bill Krattinger. He's an historic preservation program analyst with New York State's Division for Historic Preservation. Bill, how important is registry listing when a group or municipality is trying to save an historic structure?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical because a lot of the incentives we have in the preservation field, both grants and tax incentives, run through that designation and require it. It also requires a willing dance partner, of course, and one of the reasons the Lent House wasn't on the National Register is probably because the owner did not desire it to be. So it really is critical. I have written, our office has issued an eligibility statement based on our knowledge of the building, its history and context, that is in fact National Register eligible, and we in fact are going to move forward with a nomination during this year.
Wait,
so that will happen.
No,
we're talking about your house, the greenhouse.
John
Yes,
Greenhouse.
the greenhouse. That is worthy. This opportunity, I want to say, you might find this surprising, but pretty much every community has a John Greenhouse, and ironically enough, often it is the house of a prominent individual. Not every community has a group of people who come together and try to build the momentum. You guys have that here right now with this group, and I implore you to support their efforts.
Thank you. Can you speak to your observations of any other houses that we've dealt with in the film?
Well, I know all of them. I think I had been in all of them, actually, including the Teaberry Courthouse. The Lent House, believe me, I've spent the better part of 20 years in this field. Things get torn down, we see things demolished, we see bad solutions. Mary Cardenas was kind enough to call me right after that happened. I was with my family on Easter, and like everyone else was really sickened on a certain level because I had been in the house twice. Tom had allowed me access, and it was such a compelling artifact and such an important and early building. I don't want to vilify the owner. But that one in particular, I would say, really hurt as much as anything I've seen in my nearly 17 years with the state.
Yeah, and Amanda, the Bucky House too.
Absolutely, that's a house that really is remarkably pure. I think this gentleman here on the right can actually have spent more time in it, but clearly an early house with a lot of early fabric, architectural fabric into the early 19th century. A building that, when I was told efforts were going to be mounted to potentially restore it, it's a sort of building that you really need to understand first because there are nuances to it, there are features that might be overlooked. So also an incredible house.
Can you very briefly explain Can you briefly outline, the listing process so that...
Yeah, absolutely. In essence, a property owner or someone who has the support of an owner engages our office. We use the National Register criteria, which date back to 1966, to make an analysis of a building, a structure, landscape, whatever it might be. Its merits, architecturally, historically, sometimes archaeologically. Does the resource, as we call it, have enough physical integrity to portray its history? In the case of the greenhouse, it looks somewhat degraded, but when you go inside, you see an intact period floor plan, you see the arrangement of fireplaces, you see early finished features, you see a staircase, you see that it has enough really to tell its history, and that's what we're leaning on in this instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Bob Dell, an academic, an inventor, and member of the Town of Orangetown Planning Board. The Seth House was a perfect example of government, citizens, and a developer working for the common good. How can we make developers more aware, sensitive to, and willing to incorporate significant historical buildings into their projects? In short, what incentives can we give them?
Okay, well, first I have to make a slight disclaimer.
Go on.
I'm speaking now as a private citizen. What I say has no effect on my speaking for the board or anyone else. And also, too, I might have trouble commenting directly on the two properties in Orangetown, the Seth House and the Lent House, because there may be ongoing litigation and other times that we might have to revisit it, and I'm sure there are those who might not want to have me reviewing it. So rather than do anything that shows a conflict of interest, I will not speak directly to that,
That's fine.
okay? But anyway, could you repeat the question?
Okay, all right. The Seth House is a perfect example of government, citizens, and a developer working for the common good. In the generic sense, I will add, how can we make developers more aware, more sensitive to, give them more incentive to incorporate significant historical buildings into their projects?
Well, it comes from government, obviously. They can get financial incentives, but a lot of it is from the press. It's basically from groups like this, people who really care. Because also, too, I will say I've dealt with many developers in my 35 years of doing this for Orangetown. Some of them are extremely thoughtful. Some of them are less than thoughtful. I think I could say that safely. But I will say that most of them, if they have a chance, will try to do the right thing. So what has to happen is a group like this who would do more than just say, can you save it? Because remember, the government is supreme sovereign of the land. And if you want to look at it from one skewed viewpoint, we don't own anything. We just rent it from the government. And if you don't believe me, don't pay your property taxes. Okay? So the government has rights, and then they have rights which they assign to individuals. And then you have the federal level, you have the state level, you have the county level, and also, too, you have the local level. And many times we can work and can get things done, but we do need to have an overall incentive. Because remember, what we're trying to do is not only preserve the community, but also maintain a good tax base and a place where everyone wants to live. So basically, activism, this type of environment, if there's, for example, if you happen to go to a planning board meeting, it might be nice. You know, many times we're there dealing with historic houses and these sort of things, and we don't really have as much support as I would like. So activism, 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 and also to vote, because town boards decide who's on the land use boards, and also too, the town boards make many decisions. And I think I can safely say, without violating anything, that under Supervisor Stewart's leadership, I think we're heading in a very good direction, and I hope we're going to continue to do so.
Are there certain local laws that generally protect or do not protect structures when it comes to historic preservation? I mean, we talked about registry listing.
Okay, well, a lot of this gets into the legal aspects. We have town attorneys, when any property comes in front of a planning board, there are a series of reviews that are already done by the state, by the county, and various town experts, etc. Then we have to put it all together. Then as a board collectively, we make up a decision. And it's the makeup of the board that many times determines which way that decision goes. I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, but I think it's important to state that that's really how this whole procedure works. We do what we can with what we've got, and I've been on some boards where it's easy to accomplish this, and other boards where it's more difficult. But basically, if someone has a signed permit to demolish a house, it's beyond the purview of the planning board. Think of us as judges, we're not the sheriff.
Okay, got that. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Tim Adriance is an expert in the early architectural history of Rockland and Bergen counties. Tim, can you briefly outline your findings for the Jacob Vanderbilt house so far?
Okay.
Generally speaking. How much time do we have? I was going to say.
There's a lot of, we have 300 years of history here, but in a nutshell. Well, I guess the first question is, what's in a name? Let me ask, is there anyone here in this room who is a descendant of anybody that was in Rockland County maybe 100 years ago, 150, 200 years ago? Okay, hello cousins. So therefore, being of the Jersey Dutch culture, which is Bergen and Rockland's joint heritage, we are all extremely intermarried. We are extremely interrelated. We do all have 10 fingers on, on each hand there. But anyway, the Vanderbilts and a number of other people moved into the area very early in the 18th century, and they had come from Long Island, Hempstead area. And there's a little stream in front of that beautiful, wonderful house that separates it from the frame house. And everything south of the stream was Vanderbilt property, and everything north was Onderdonk and Tallman. Except for the fact that they were intermarried, and they were first cousins, and they were the mothers and the fathers, and they were all interrelated. So therefore, what we have is a house that is the Onderdonk-Tallman-Budke house, with Vanderbilt genealogy just spread throughout it. So that has been the finding right off the bat about the house, is that a wonderful lady by the name of Roselle Bellows Bailey wrote a book called Pre-Revolutionary Houses of the Lower Hudson Valley in the 1930s, and she assigned the name to it, and it was the wrong name. But there's as much Vanderbilt blood in those builders and owners of the house as there was of the other families.
Talk to us about the house itself.
This house is in spectacular condition. You may not think so when you go by the road. My goodness, it's got plywood on the windows, and it looks a shambles. But if you get up in the morning, you don't comb your hair, you don't put on your makeup, you don't look so good either. But this house is sound. It's got a good roof. The walls are not collapsing. The beams have been stabilized in one area where there was some weakness. Other than that, this building has stood for 300 years and probably will stand for at least another 300 years if you just simply keep a roof on it.
Well, what do you think is the best way forward for the restoration of that building, generally speaking?
Okay, what had happened was when Hugh Traphagen owned it, he embarked on a view of a very radical restoration of let's bring it back to a time period that we imagine of what it should be. And we have documentary evidence of what the evolution of this building has been over a period of years. Right here in this building, in this library, is the earliest known photograph of the building, taken in 1900. It was a photograph taken of the house when it had just been completed through its processes of doing some alterations by the Budke family. They had put a colonnaded porch on the front. They had made the alterations with the bay window that you see from the street side today, the gable windows on the east side and so forth. That is the documented history of what the building looks like at a period of time. If we were to say, what did it look like in the 18th century, we don't know.
Going forward,
Going forward, I would recommend that the best thing to do with the house is to bring it back to the Budke period where the photographic evidence documents exactly what the building looks like. Otherwise, if you try to bring it back to a period of time, say 1790 or something of that sort, you're going to be creating Disneyland because it's not real history. This house has a real history. The real history of this house is that interrelated family members for nearly 300 years, except for 2 years, owned the house. The people that lived in the house, there were 50 of them, were mostly interrelated, but it did serve as a two-family house for a while, where immigrants were living in the house. There were at least documented 2 African slaves living in the house. We have a story. This is his story. This story is Rockland's story. It is your story. This story is what connects us to our land, to our sense of place, where we live, where we walk. And this is the story of who we are as a people in Rockland County. We, in many respects, are immigrants, but immigrants lived in this house.
right, I'm going to wrap you up there.
All right.
Because-
I could go on. This is great history.
If anybody's got any questions for our panelists, yes?
What inspired you and Rick and the others to get involved in this issue?
Well, I think it starts with living in an old house. I bet there's a show of hands. How many people in this room live in an old house? I think that's the start of the answer. You live in an old house, you understand that you're not an owner or a renter, you're a shepherd, you're a caretaker, you're a steward, and you get bitten, and for some of us, we roll beyond that house, and here we are.
I just want to say that on the few occasions where I've come back from Europe, I always feel depressed when I arrive in Rockland County.
Don't we all?
The architecture
I feel that way when I
is
come
such a
back from
come
Vermont. Okay, somebody else? Yes.
Relative to involving developers, Were there any kind of agreements with the developer about the nature of the restoration or construction of the house?
Okay, can you address that to somebody specific? Are you addressing that to which house?
The house where the developer's turning it into the community center for the.
Okay, why don't we?
Okay, I can't speak specifically to that again, but just generically.
Yes, please.
Sometimes they're willing to do it. Quite often they may see a profit motive there. It also could obviously be a selling point, like I mentioned in the film. Many times you have to remember it's a negotiation process. They want to get something approved, and there may be some bit of horse trading, so to speak, about saving areas of green, arrangements of buildings, number of units, etc. So it varies, but basically, when push comes to shove, they're definitely interested in profit, but the other thing they're definitely interested in, I think most of them feel that this is going to be their legacy, the builders themselves. Now, not all of them are that way, and large corporate ones may not be that way, but my experience is that many of them are, and they do try to do the right thing.
Okay, another question, yes?
In Fairlawn, there's a similar situation, and the developer is restoring the house for the community center, but he's removed the mantles, he's removed the Dutch door, he's stripped all the plaster. So what you're going to have standing left is the sandstone walls of what was once an historic house. And I'm just wondering whether there's in this negotiation process, it seems like that's something that needs to be addressed.
All right, well, remember planning boards, for example, we don't have much to say about the interior. We can say some things about the exterior. With the University College, I'm with Cooper Union, they had their original building that Peter Cooper built, and back in the 1970s, they took everything out except for the support walls and rebuilt it. Now, another thing you have to realize about some of these houses, there was a joke that they used to tell when I was a kid, which is a newspaper reporter is interviewing a farmer who has Abraham Lincoln's axe. And he says, well, it's a remarkable good shape because you're using it all the time. What's the secret? He said, it's simple. It's had 5 new handles and 3 new heads. Okay? So the question is how much restoration and what the costs are.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Questions? That's it? Yep, yes?
I have a question for Bill. How would you go about getting a designation on religious structures that are still active, they're still active?
We do it all the time, actually. It's just that they're assessed on the merits of their architectural significance as opposed to their religious significance. I've probably listed as many churches on the National Register as houses, so it's really an evaluation of their architectural merits, be it a Gothic Revival church or an early meeting house, whatever it might be. It just requires a willing owner and someone to make an application.
Thank you.
Can I follow that question?
Sure.
Just a follow-up, and you probably said this before, and it's in my mind, but what does listing do? Does it
Well,
impose
yeah.
a burden on a project?
Well, let's look at it really,
Provide funding, I mean,
and I think often the closer we get to the city, National Register designation gets sort of mixed up with Landmarks Preservation Commission and regulation. National Register does not come with any built-in regulation. There are no strings attached. When federal or state money becomes involved, they're permitting, that's where it does. In the case of the Lentz House, were it listed on the National Register, it would have given it stronger consideration in the seeker process, because seeker does not take into account eligibility. Doesn't mean it might be here today, because I think it was Walter in the film mentions, these laws are not particularly strong. State or federal preservation law, seeker, none of them really. When you get down to it, without advocacy or a sensitive developer, oftentimes it's mitigation, and mitigation doesn't always mean saving it. It means finding middle ground. So I think there is importance to it. There are a lot of incentives, and there is no built-in regulation. Important to reinforce that point.
Bill, can I follow up on that? I think that it's true that designation doesn't really provide any protection. But what does provide protection, I think it's important to get out ahead of the process. In other words, to get an inventory, to get people like Bill out in the field, all of you, to identify the buildings that potentially are valuable and at risk, and to have a broad, kind of cast a broad net. And then it is possible to, local designation and a local process actually has more oomph and it has more clout. If it's accompanied by a set of guidelines that can, in other words, where applicants come to the table, it's really almost impossible when the developer already has his teeth into a property to, then you're negotiating. You don't want to be in a position of negotiating. You want to be able to say, before somebody has even evaluated a property, that it already has this resource on it, and that this set of deliberate controls have been placed on that property, and you need to model it in a certain way, and in fact, that there may be incentives built in for certain kinds of uses, so that this inventory of potential uses for old and historic buildings that we want to have available is sort of in the real estate community. You want to have it out there in the real estate offices. Is that the developer knows when he's coming that I'm going to buy this, but I'm also buying, kind of an effort to do this and follow these rules. And that's the time to do it. And locally, has a lot of room, because when you get to the planning board can then say, or the historic district commission or whatever it is, can say, hey, sorry, this is it. You knew about this when you bought it, so we don't have an Article 78 problem here.
I'd like to add to that too. The John Greenhouse is located in the village of Nyack. We're in the town of Orangetown, but we're in the village of Nyack, which has a landmarking provision in its code. So we're in the process of not only seeking our state and federal listing on the registries, but we're also seeking landmark status, which in Nyack gives us all sorts of protection. It prevents the building from being demolished without a lengthy process of application and delay. I think in Nyack it's a one-year demolition delay when you're a landmark building. It also limits what you can and can't do to the facade without going through the architectural review board. There are all sorts of provisions. You need the owner's consent to landmark the building. But if you take the initiative and go through the process, you're protecting the building not only while you own it, but you're protecting it, going into the future. So, while the town of Orangetown may not have that availability, maybe the local village does. So there's lots of advantages.
Yes?
Given that we went through like this whole housing crisis and stuff, and many foreclosures have happened, and banks are not letting the houses go, what if you see like a potential historic house that is just sitting there rotting away, and you would like to actually try and purchase it, get it out of the hands of the bank? You have gone obviously through the process to prevent houses from getting into as bad of a shape as the greenhouse. How do you go about it? And also, do banks have a certain liability to actually keep those houses intact and not just letting them rot so that they don't have to write it off their books?
Well, in our experience, we were fortunate because the house was owned by a bank. A lot of times, like if we had gotten involved 3 years ago, we would have had an absentee owner from another state who we would have had to probably purchase the house from, or wait for them to default on their mortgage to deal with the bank. But I think that the answer is to figure out, is to organize, is to have your entity together, is to have a plan, have the right people to approach, and to make it worth their while. I mean, you don't have to necessarily own a house. I mean, you could take a long-term license or a lease on the house. There's all sorts of eligibility if you have more than 6 years on a lease, that we're eligible for all sorts of grants to preserve it. I mean, there's all kinds of availabilities but ownership is definitely the way to go. It's really, without ownership, you can't consent to landmark status, you can't consent to registry listings, but there are, some things that you can do without owning, but they're very limited.
Anybody else?
And I'm sorry, may I ask one more question? Are banks supposed to take care of those properties, especially when they're like older, or Can they do just what they want
They have
or
to pay
don't
the
want?
taxes. You know,
That's
they have
about
to
it.
mow the lawn. You know, they have, you know, they basically are willing to let them go. I mean, there was a while there when banks were giving away houses wholesale. I mean, you could form a not-for-profit and be a low-income housing group, and you could walk away with houses anywhere. You know, I think that has kind of dried up a little bit now. But there was a while there when getting a house was not a difficult thing.
Anybody else? Yes?
You said on the John Green house, you don't have much of the interior intact anymore. When you go into that house, will you attempt to actually make it look period correct, maybe if it had crown moldings or something, just to make it look like it was in the 1850s?
Okay, so we've removed those things that are non-contributing to its historic fabric. And we've had, I think it was 5 dumpsters full of that sort of thing. But if you're welcome to have a tour of this anytime you want. If you walk through the house, you see all the original hand ribbon lathing. You see all the joinery. You see the mortise and tenon structure. We've kept the floors covered, but we have all the original wide floorboards. If you walk into the top floor and look at the attic, you could see the wonderful structure. It's all there. I mean, eventually we're gonna have to cover it up with something to make it rentable. But I mean, the fabric will still be there. We're not going to remove anything that was of historic significance.
Anybody else?
Tina? can I make a comment?
Yes, you may.
2 quick things. First of all, you have 2 values. Quite often, the land is worth far more than the structure, and particularly when you get into saving an old structure. One case I can talk about generically is we had an historic house we wanted to save, and I won't say where it is, and then the cost of saving it was 2 to 3 times building replacement. Now, obviously, they're not making any more houses, but they're not making any more land, and land really is the critical issue. And from a planning viewpoint, you have to realize that when these old houses were made, you had a large expanse of land, and you found the ideal place that had maybe the best wind, the best water, the best views, and that's where you put your house. Now what's happened is every little piece that's left over, you're trying to squeeze something into it. And what happens if, say, if you have a large original house plan, a lot, let's say of a couple of acres, and someone wants to come in and develop that lot, well, the best place in that lot has already been taken up by the historic house, and that's why there's often a conflict.
Any last question? Yes?
My question, I think, was largely answered by some of the comments about getting ahead of the process.
Yeah.
But so maybe my question, and if the panel has anything more to say, great, but maybe it's more to a lot of the people in this room, because I have a feeling the movers and shakers of this are here right today. After the Lent House went down, and thank you, Tina and Rick, for your heroic efforts, but it was really a last-minute kind of thing. We just weren't ahead of the game. We were there, all of us, Mary, everybody, after the demolition permit. And I guess one of the things, forgive me for this long thing, but one of the things I didn't realize is that, if you apply for your demolition permit, knock the house down, and then go to the planning board and say, oh, by the way, I have a vacant piece of land, and I want to do X, Y, Z, Bob never gets to see it. And whatever sensitive people are there about the historical aspects of it, maybe even large parts of the seeker process are not even employed, or at least the way it often happens. So Andy and Elijah had started a process, I know, to inventory, so that the towns and all the officials would have just a quick list. So when these demolition permits come up, and I guess my question to you guys is, how important is that? And but also, where does that process stand now? For all I know, it's been done, but I have a feeling that we kind of, there's various inventories, but they're not really all put together, because I don't want to do one just for Orangetown, where, Andy and I live, but I want to do it for the Rockland County. It's such a historic place. And number 2, after you get the inventory, someone, I think, mentioned something about model legislations, or just, it doesn't have to be a complicated, it's probably very simple rules, like, wait 1 year after but just some examples to give to the towns. I'd like to see every town in Rockland County have something like this that could prevent a Lent House from happening again. And let's see, who wants to work on it?
Yeah, we all do. We all do.
So I don't know if there's comments. on that, or where that
Well, I
process
think-
stands?
There is a model. In Bergen County, they did what was known as the Historic Site Survey of the entire county. Of the 70 municipalities, each town was surveyed as to what the historic resources were. One of the adjuncts to that was the Bergen County Stone House Survey, which created the thematic nomination to the National Register. At that time in 1983, it was the largest nomination to the National Register of Historic Places. There were 211 buildings that were placed on the register at one time because of that theme. But that theme is not exclusive to Bergen County because we are within a mutual cultural region with Bergen and Rockland. And as far as I know at this moment, my discussions with folks here in Rockland County is such that there is no complete inventory. You can't say we have, what, 250, 300, 100 old stone houses in Rockland County? How many frame houses do you have? I will tell you do have the resources for them. Claire Thal, a friend of mine, she did a fantastic map indicating all the stone houses in Rockland County. You have archival resources. Do you know that the 1865 Rockland County census lists the type of house that the person lived in? So you can tell at one particular period whether or not how many stone houses, frame houses, or brick houses were in the county. But the first thing is to identify what you have. Then once you identify what you have, then you approach the community to get pride in what is there.
Okay, and I'm going to pick up from that because my parting shot, yes. Did you have something?
Just a quick, not a question, just a quick comment.
Better, good.
Excellent film, Tina, bravo.
Thank you.
And just like the 1970 environmental commercial that we all remember with the Indian in a canoe with the tear
Did you
down
see
the
the
face
tear?
and the pollution of the stream. My favorite image from this was the painting, and I'm like, the tear is moving. And when Mary, all of us Longtown, Orangetown residents, 59 years, when Mary, bless your heart, when you're talking about that, I'm sure all of us who are involved with the Lent House were getting a little emotional. So I'm picturing now, that was Abram Lent's image with the tear. And his ghost right now is with us in the room, and he's throwing down his face.
That's so funny. You had to be a certain age to get that. Very good.
Well, those kids, yeah.
Make sure you get a button on the way out. So I just want to say that, you know, what I've heard tonight, which is what I already know, is that you know, it takes more than just going out there and, you know, screaming about saving an old house or slapping something up on Facebook. Historic preservation, you have to roll up your sleeves and it becomes part of what you do every day, and it is tiresome and it is tedious and it is hard, and you hit a lot of brick walls, no pun intended, but in the end of the day when we come out victorious, it's really a satisfaction like none other. So with that said, buy some buttons to help us. Look at our literature for the John Greenhouse. Put your names on it.
Become a member.
Become a member of the John Greenhouse on the way out, and tell all your friends and family about the film and the John Greenhouse and the Vanderbilt Bucky House, and keep historic preservation going, because this county matters, this place matters, this village matters. It all matters.
I just want to thank...
Wait, Mary wants to say something.
I'd like to make a statement, and I was thinking about this for a long time, and here it is. Since we have inherited these houses or these sites, we become their keepers, and these things from the past we bring to the future. These are our legacy. Take care of them.
Thank you.
I want to thank all our panelists, Tina, and you guys for all showing up here tonight. If you enjoyed this kind of programming and you want more from the library, tell them we have evaluation forms in the back and plenty of mini golf pencils for you to fill them out with. So please do that on your way out. It only takes a minute.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. Well, I don't